Hello, I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Season 1, Episode 40, the season finale of Art, the podcast where we get to know women from around the world of visual arts.
If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll show you what I mean. If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll bring you to your knees. If you follow me.
Thank you for joining me for this final episode of 2023. And after what has been a really enjoyable first season of this podcast, meeting so many wonderful women from around the world of visual arts, I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed hosting the show. And I can tell you that I will be back in 2024 with a new season, but more of that later on in the show, because on this final episode of 2024, we've picked a very interesting guest and who was nominated by Gretchen Warthen, who you will remember was on the show earlier this year. And as you may know, if you're a regular listener, that I do ask all of my guests to name women whose work they admire, and very often these women will be guests on the show. And my guest this week is filmmaker and cinematographer Hope Hall, who has built a career that includes assuming the role as principal presidential videographer to President Obama, a position that she considered was the best job in the world. Her journey, however, started a long way from the White House, in a different world, as a modern dancer. Hope was born in 1969 in Chicago to Tom Hall, a retired Navy officer and advertising account executive, and Betsy Hall, a secretary. She's the youngest of 3 children and has 3 more siblings from her father's second marriage. Her mother navigates lifelong severe mental illness, and Hope asks for her siblings and her to move in with her father and stepmother after living in Brazil and Mexico following her parents' divorce. She then lived with her new family in Chicago, California, and Connecticut. Music has always played a role in Hope's life. She plays the piano, guitar, and now the drums, as well as being a singer. She also practiced gymnastics in her youth, and classical ballet proved to be the start of her dancing career. Hope took part in dance and theatre in high school and college before making her way to Venice, San Francisco, and New York as a professional dancer. From an early age, she had a sense of social justice and enjoyed storytelling, so she was naturally drawn to photojournalism, which gave her the foundation for filmmaking. Hope studied at the University of Paris Centre for Critical Studies from 1989 to 1990, the University of California, Berkeley, where she got her BA in History and French in 1991, and her MA at Stanford University in Documentary Film and Video in 2000. Hope then moved back to New York City, where she began incorporating music videos and projection design into her cinematography and directing practice. In addition to serving as President Obama's videographer, Hope was senior advisor for video and senior road videographer to Senator Warren's presidential campaign, and then director, digital strategy advisor, and cinematographer for both the Biden and Harris campaign and administration. Hope lives in New York, where she is now enjoying life as a freelancer. Hope, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm delighted to have you. I know you've listened to some of the episodes too.
Yeah, I've been having such fun. I've been going backwards in time. I feel like I'm a big fan of reverse engineering, so I like to hear the most recent and then start to work backwards with you because it sort of creates a journey. It's like, here's theme, here's repetition, here's a variable.
Well, I know you've told me that one of your preferred mediums is creative nonfiction, and you know that everyone has a story, and the women we have on this show certainly do have a story, and yours, I think, is probably going to be as colourful and interesting a journey as anyone who's been on the show, Hope. So it's almost like that love story song, where do I begin to tell the story? Should we begin just to bring us up to the present moment in time, because you're living in New York City and you are freelance now. Are you enjoying that change in pace?
Yeah, I'm honoring the free in freelance, meaning my freedom. And one of the big things that that I willingly, but also somewhat unwittingly sacrificed when I took my first full-time job, which was very, very intense and which we will discuss, was really to give up my autonomy. And my autonomy is something I've been nurturing, practicing, honoring since I had the personal will to do it. I grew up in a pretty, at times, some pretty chaotic situations. And so as soon as I could, I kind of took charge where I had access to the stress dial and to the freedom dial. And I feel like I've really continued to practice that in my life. And so it was a really big deal. It was also, there was a lot of learning and growing in living on a very, very short leash and being on someone else's time. And like I said, since I've really been honing my capacity to honor my own timing and my own freedom since I was a kid, it was a massive shift. And I've gone back to it since, willingly. And now that I'm back in the world of the free, I'm grappling with it. I love it, and I love obviously the beautiful parts that go with it. I think the parts that maybe I'm finding myself in need of or searching for support with, and I do this work with a lot of younger people and mentees in my life, and with my circle of advisors and friends is, just talking about the stress of not knowing, the stress of the hustle, what that means for us, and how and when we choose to dial that down is, as we age. I've navigated some pretty serious health issues over, in particular, this past year, but we all have over pandemic, and even starting further back with the political tumult and this on the planet. And the thing I sent you, the mindset sheet, is really something that I started with at work, but as a beautiful person in my therapeutic life taught me, we all have areas of play where we can practice behaviors that then help us in more of the thickets of our inner lives. And for whatever reason, I've always been a worker bee. I love working. I've always loved going to school. I love being in class. I love having a job. I love being of service. I love being useful. So it kind of makes sense that the first place that I would start to practice was at work.
I could see a book for you here. Land of Hope and Free. But there's a beginning to all this. So
yeah,
let's rewind a little bit, Hope.
Okay.
Let's go all the way back.
Yeah, let's go all the way back. I love origin stories. So, you go as far as you want.
All right. I'm going to go back right to the beginning. You were born in Chicago in September 1969.
Yes.
To quite a large family. You have 5 siblings. So
yes.
Tell us a little bit about the area that you grew up in, where you were born and raised.
Yeah, it's an hour in and of itself, but I will attempt to keep the long story on the shorter end of the spectrum. But I was born the youngest of 3, and my parents were kind of living a pretty conservative, more, I guess I would say, not politically conservative, but they were in a kind of a stultified suburban setting in Chicago. And neither of them kind of really grew up that way, but that's kind of where they ended up because both of their parents had moved into this kind of setting. And by the time I came along, things were really shifting in my family. my parents, in their inner lives were quite fluid and flexible and playful, but they were living in a very, I guess I'll say, homogenous suburban setting in the 60s. Think of Ice Storm, think of, because of course I immediately go to movie references, but, not a lot of diversity, not a lot of, playfulness, I guess. There were a lot of expectations that they were meeting. And my mom in particular, I think, really, really struggled with those. She still navigates severe mental illness. And at the time it was, or I should say not at the time, in her setting, it was absolutely unsupported to seek treatment. And even though they did try, it was too hard for lots of different reasons. And so that being said, by the time I came along, my brother and sister were coming home from school saying some weird shit that my parents were pretty upset about in terms of the other kids and in terms of their kind of worldview. And my dad started out, he was ROTC and then went into the Navy, but he was a very charismatic person, and he became a door-to-door salesman for Kraft, which then led to working in advertising, which actually both his father, sister, and grandfather had worked in. So he ended up working at Leo Burnett, which is the ad agency that Mad Men is based on, kind of at the same era. So I'll just let I'll let the theater, the visuals unspool in your creative minds, listeners. So, stuff was getting looser, wackier, and Leo Burnett was very successful. And my dad was part of these kind of big ad campaigns that did very, very well. And because my mom was really struggling and my brother and sister were navigating, again, the limitations of a pretty stultified social environment, when Leo Burnett said, hey, we're looking for volunteers to move overseas, my dad was essentially a very enthusiastic volunteer. And so we moved to Mexico City, and I was a baby. And I grew up in a completely different environment, thanks to the wisdom of my parents. And I lived in Mexico City till I was about 3. And then we moved to Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I was there till I was about 8. My parents got divorced. They did their best navigating what they were navigating. But then we moved back to Chicago. And that's when I became one of 5. So my dad remarried. My stepmom had also lived in Brazil, so I actually knew my stepmom and my stepbrother and sister from our years in Brazil. So that made the whole blended family, that affected how we blended, and it all worked pretty well. But as you can imagine, 5 kids is chaotic, and my dad was the sole breadwinner, and my mom was really devolving. We had tried living with my mom, and it was pretty disastrous. And so we moved in with my dad, and he actually got custody of us. It was contingent on treatment for my mom, but that never really happened. So we
what age were you then, Hope?
8 to 10 is when we lived in Chicago as a family of 5 kids. And my mom actually lived right nearby. So I did get to see her. My grandparents lived nearby, and they were like alternate parents to me, as was my uncle. And I'm very close with my mom. We can talk more about that. And they've made a lot of work about my relationship with my mom, or in light of, and actually in collaboration with her. But it was very clear to me. And as the youngest, I had a little more freedom to say so. And I was the one that said to my dad, we need to move in with you. This is not working. And at the time, this was 1977. And again, in a pretty conservative atmosphere, for the man to get custody was pretty unusual. So it was back to my reference to there was some navigating some chaos growing up. And then we moved to LA because my dad got a big new job, and in the end, it completely fizzled within 3 months. And so, and my stepmom was about to give birth to all of our half brother, and that's when we became 6 kids. And my dad was jobless, and my stepmom was an aspiring actor. So also not bringing in income. And so things really started to fall apart in terms of the kind of the fabric, the stability of my family. And I think that's when I kind of stepped in. I was a middle kid, but I was the mediator. I was the peacemaker. There was a lot of mental illness within my family, not just with my mom, but with some of my siblings. And there was a history of abuse in previous marriages. And so I kind of helped raise my baby brother, and who's basically one of my very favorite people on the planet today. And, it kind of kept things together, but immediately started babysitting and bringing in income and helping with the rent and cooking food. And I think this is where this real yearning for autonomy and being just my own person on the planet, in addition to being of service to my family, I think that's where it really started. So that's the origin story of autonomy and freedom in my life.
And how was this fitting in with school, though, in your education? How did it impact you?
Well, I think it's one of the reasons I believe in multiple intelligence, the Howard Gardner concept of, everyone's brilliant. I'm a learner. I love being in class and learning from people, who are willing to share their skill set and history and with me and teach me things. And so I always loved school from the beginning, from sandbox days, again, I learn alongside other people. We're all various versions of introverts and extroverts, but for me, kind of bumping up against other life forms, that's where the molecules start to rearrange.
But with that kind of background, though, in your family, I'm wondering how it affected you socially and making friends in school.
Yeah, I'm a pleaser. I've done a lot of therapeutic work in terms of my codependent behaviors. I definitely know how to read a situation in a room so that I feel safe and loved and playful. I'm not an isolator, which has been very interesting during pandemic because, of course, I am. All humans are. And I've really enjoyed some of the isolation and what I've learned about myself. But I love to laugh and dance and sing and play and tousle and listen. And again, from a very early age, that was my dad used to joke, because I was also very shy, and I think it was because of my family situation. So I was very quiet. I didn't say very much, apparently, as a kid. And my dad used to joke, he'd say, one of my favorite things about you, which is just so funny to think of now, for you as an adult. But he said, I remember you went to this in Mexico City. I went to this German, like, kinder, like a, nursery school down the street. And they had this camp, and I didn't speak German, but I was learning, and I spoke Spanish before English and some Quechua, and, I was just figuring it out. So I was very quiet. And he said by the end of the summer, they had this little ceremony thing, and we're all singing, and I'm singing, and I'm dancing with the little German kids. And then they give out the awards, and they say most improved camper, and it's me.
So, what subjects were of particular interest to you then in those early years?
Languages for sure, and math. I definitely have an analytical math mind. I love systems, which is why I love working with cameras and technology, and I love taking things apart and putting them back together. I love mechanics, but languages are to me like it's like color. I have synesthesia, which my mom and my sister do too, and I see things in color. I see numbers as colors, and I can sort of remember long strings of numbers with colors, and music is smell and color, and I feel like language is like that. It's like theme and variation. It's like music. And maybe because I spoke Spanish before English, and because I was sort of always parroting and imitating and reading the room and observing and listening and playing back sounds, it's just a very and I play a lot of music and listen to a lot of music, and I work with a lot of musicians. It's just a very happy place for me.
I love your playlist, by the way. You sent me.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that must have taken a little while to compile, but yeah, I'm working my way through that. So thank you for sending me your playlist.
You're welcome. I just keep adding to it. So I recommend, I put it on shuffle now. I used to kind of listen because I started it right when pandemic hit, because I really wanted a way to, I always made playlists for my friends, like starting with cassettes and then CDs and then online. And anyway, it was just a way for me to communicate with myself and with my friends and reach out. But I've just kept adding to it. So now I recommend whenever I share it with anyone, I say, just listen on shuffle, because the progression is actually no longer, even though I love that in playlists, I love creating, like writing a symphony, creating a structure. But this one's really pretty, because now we're we're honing in on 4 years of pandemic. So,
well, your love of music, I'm bound to ask if you play any instruments.
I do.
What do you play?
I first started with piano. I come from a long line of pianists, actually. And I've moved around so much in my life that there are very few things in my home that I've kind of carried with me for a long time, or have been in my life for a long time. And one of the few things that I have now, it's certainly the thing that's been with me the longest in my life. And it means I'm never leaving this apartment in Brooklyn, because when I say it, you will laugh. I have my great grandmother's Steinway grand piano.
Oh, how wonderful.
Can you believe it?
Yeah. Now, are you composing music on that as well? Because obviously you play and you like...
I play, and then I played violin, and I was always singing. So I was always in choirs. I love singing. Then I learned guitar, and now I'm a drummer. I play with this incredible Brazilian samba reggae, like a samba school. So I used to go to Carnival every year when I lived as a kid in Sao Paulo. We would go to Rio every year for Carnival, and that music, the rhythms, we would go around to each of the, at that time, 12 samba schools. And when I heard it's all female, and I heard them play, I was trying to get out the vote in the Halloween parade last year in New York City, and behind us were the most incredible drummers, all female. And I was on this float that was very political. It was a lot of women's, march folks who were not getting along with each other. And I just turned around and I said, I want to be with those people. So I joined this amazing drum corps. It's a bateria, and there are 100 and I think now 40 of us, and we play publicly a lot. And one of the beautiful things about it, in addition to being all female samba drums, which I play a lot of quiet instruments, and suddenly to bang on a big ass drum, it's just heavenly.
Yeah, quite a release. But I'm wondering, just going back to school, where did you actually go to high school, Hope?
Yeah, high school, by the time I was in high school, we'd moved around every couple of years in my life. So I had never lived anywhere more than a couple of years. And then, so I was pretty used to it at that point, and I was good. I still keep up, with friends from all of my life. It's really important to me. I call them my family of friends. And so I went to, but I had never lived in the suburbs. I'd always lived in big cities. And it just so happened that my dad got a job in New York, but we were 6 kids, and there was a lot of chaos and financial insecurity. And so we moved instead of, we couldn't afford to live in the city, and found a spot about a little over an hour outside of New York in a suburb in Connecticut. And I went to high school in a pretty small town with people who had literally known each other since they were in diapers. And I came in from having lived all over the world, never more than a couple of years. And they were, to their credit, they were amazing. And they really embraced me. It wasn't without some very embarrassing moments, because also I just didn't really know about that culture. I guess the movie reference is like the John Hughes culture. I didn't know about like Bruce Springsteen, and I was a like new like I listened to whatever Oingo Boingo and Tears for Fears and Brazilian music, and I don't know. I just didn't know any of these references, and I didn't know about the Grateful Dead, and I didn't really know about American suburban pop culture at all. And it was 1983, and I spent all 4 years of high school in one place.
What was the name of the school?
Oh, at the time, well, now it's called this again. It was called Roger Ludlow High School. It's in Fairfield, Connecticut. And it's just over an hour train ride to New York. And I was so excited to be living in New York. That's the way I saw it. So I would just hop on the train after school, because you walk to the train station from the school. And I went to school with people who had never been to New York City, or if they had, it was to see the chorus line. And I was just like, I was at Canal Jean and Pearl River and whatever, just like walking around downtown and, going to ska concerts and meeting whatever. I don't know. I loved it, but I was also, and I'm still very good friends with a lot of my friends from high school. But it's so funny that they still refer to me as the foreign exchange student, because that's what it was like. I sort of landed there, had a great time, and left. Well, a lot of them still live there, and I really I love it, and I go see them pretty regularly. So.
And what subjects were you enjoying in high school then?
History. History was my big thing, and languages. I took Spanish for sure, and then because I thought I wanted to be a Spanish literature major, because it was my first language, and then luckily for me, because I'm a total language nerd, they actually were offering Latin. And that's like the perfect combination between math and language. So I took Latin for 3 years. And it was totally great. I loved it so much. I loved the ancient history aspect of it. I loved, the math of it. And then it also helped me because then in college, I learned French and studied in France. And then I learned Italian. And that's really because, it helps to speak Spanish first, but it's really the Latin that helped. And I'm quite sad that Latin isn't something that's offered more widely, but that's another subject, our education system in this country.
So at that time then, were you as a child playing with a camera?
I always had a still camera. My grandfather was an amateur photographer. And actually, my other grandfather, on both sides, my other grandfather apparently made 16 millimeter films in the Navy in the Pacific in World War II. They were kind of propaganda, and then my mom's dad on the other side, he always had a still camera. He always had a Browning hanging around his neck. And so one of the first kind of big kid presents I got was a 110, a Kodak. And I loved that thing. Oh my gosh. I loved that little tiny camera. I could still feel the roll of the film going through the sprockets and and I would just be so excited to go pick up the prints and still photography really remained my access to the visual world through college. But I was always in theater because I was a dancer. This is another part of my life that really actually contributed most to my becoming a filmmaker, is that I was a pretty serious dancer. First as a gymnast and a competitive gymnast as a kid, and the competitive nature really didn't work with my pacifist Ferdinand the Bull like version of the world. So I didn't like the competition, but I loved the movement and the training. And so then I moved to dance, first classical and ballet, and I was quite serious in high school. And then I chose college instead of dance, which felt at the time like a big decision. But looking back, it was very obvious that I wasn't going to be, devoting my life as a ballerina. That was just not enough. I mean, not to diminish it in any way, but not enough for me in terms of social justice, narrative. It felt like being an athlete rather than, again, nothing against athletes, but, I just wanted more story. I wanted more interaction. I wanted more collaboration. And so I did a lot of theater in high school, and then I started doing it again in college, and I started taking modern in college. And coming out of college, because I had studied in Paris in college, I kind of moved straight into dance theater, the kind of Pina Bausch mode. And because I really loved the storytelling in it, and I loved that it involved, much more of the theatrical aspects rather than just the body. And that's when, and I was at that time pretty, I was taking a lot of stills. And at one point I took a job as a photojournalist for Colors magazine. I don't know if you remember that. It's kind of still around in some version or another, but it was the Benetton magazine. And I just thought that was the coolest job ever.
Was that your first job?
No, my first job was definitely babysitting. I mean, like age 9.
Well, you actually got paid for it.
Oh, yeah. No. And in fact, my friends love to joke about this, but I don't know if you're a Princess Bride fan, but I have a Princess Bride reference, which is I sort of created this Dread Pirate Roberts model where, because my family there were eviction notices on our door and everyone else was in chaos. And for whatever reason, I've just always known how to make money and save money. And so I started babysitting, and then I was getting so many requests that I started sort of farming out the jobs. Like Dread Pirate Roberts, I'd say, oh, I'll be there. And then right before I'd say, I'm sending Susie Rothman instead. But because it came from me, they were like, okay, it was sort of like a referral program. And so I just started making pretty serious cash, like age 9.
Quite the entrepreneur at an early age then. Yeah.
I know.
So when you were in high school then and heading to college, did you have a sense of direction beyond the love that you had for languages and history?
I'm hoping I have less and less of this, but especially as a teenager, maybe that was my small version of rebellion, because I couldn't rebel in the kind of normal teenage ways, because that would be the end of my family. One of the ways that I kind of rebelled or felt like it empowered me was to kind of hold a big middle finger or two to expectations around, what I was going to be and what college I went to and what my SAT scores were and all these kind of, that's sort of part of my social justice. Like I have literally been marching in the streets since I could march.
I was going to ask you that, when the activism came in and this social justice interest, that was in school.
Well, no, apparently at age 4, I was so pissed off that our next door neighbors didn't have power in Brazil, and we did. And I was a very, very tiny kid because my mom was quite sick when I was in utero. And so my development was very, very slow. And apparently we had this big wall that I used to clamber up on and sit and talk to the neighbors who lived, in much more tenuous situation than we did. They were sort of not squatting 100% and not homeless 100%, but didn't have like 4 walls and a roof the way we did. And I was so pissed off. I was like, I don't understand. You live here. You should have power. They didn't have any power. And so I cobbled together all these different extension cords, apparently. And my mom caught me lassoing like a cowgirl. I was like whipping this thing around my head, trying to throw it over this high wall so that my neighbors could use our power at age 4. Because that kind of like the circumstances of your birth determining your access to resources pisses me off in a way that like also energizes me and gets me very excited. And I think I also come from a number of different lawyers. And I think that in one way I thought maybe I would become a lawyer because of this sense of wherever there's injustice, it's not against any one of us. It's against all of us. And my job is to hang my weight, whatever access to power I have, and like hang on the end of the moral arc of universe and bend it towards justice. Otherwise, excuse me, what the f are we doing here? Okay, I'm going to get down off my soapbox.
Well, this, of course, carried on into your adult life. So I'm curious. I'm curious as to where, in terms of your education, the new interests were introduced and how they came into your hemisphere.
Okay, so you won't be surprised I went to Berkeley.
That was after Paris. You were in Paris from 89 for a year, did you?
So when I went to Berkeley, I then went and studied in Paris as part of my undergrad. So because I had really wanted to study abroad in high school, but the chaos of my family meant that that was entirely impossible. And so I was determined I really wanted to go actually study university full time in another country. But again, because of my family situation and because at that point I was supporting a lot of my family's finances, but also putting myself through school. So it just was not possible. But I had my first babysitting job. Our next door neighbor in LA was Ry and Susie Cooter, the very famous musician. And Ry and Susie, their son Joaquin, who's also now a very, very well-known musician, had just been born. And so I started babysitting for Joaquin. And they kind of became alternate parents and were very both supportive and concerned for what was happening next door with my family. And they had gone to Berkeley. And that it just lodged in my head. And I was like, I am going to Berkeley. I am going to Berkeley. And so I went, and it also wasn't coincidence. It was as far within the country from my family as I could get in terms of starting to carve out some space and time for autonomy, where that was just super diverse and felt like a city. felt like a drawing, like it had a pull for people from all over the world. And it was thrilling. I really loved it. I mean, I really loved it.
And from there, you went to Stanford and you decided to do documentary film and video. So,
Yeah.
mark on this journey, though, for us, where the change of interests actually were inserted.
Okay. So I was a modern dancer. I was working in dance theater. So I had moved. So I ended up being an art history student and studying Dada and Surrealism and the Futurists and learning Italian. So I got this really cool job in Venice, Italy, after college, and I moved to Venice, and it changed my life. Absolutely. The mix of beauty, ancient culture, language, visual arts. And I started performing with some Italian dance theater companies there, fell in love with someone who was living in San Francisco, an Italian American. So I moved to San Francisco and we had a theater together, an interactive performance space in a storefront in the Lower Haight. And so then I became a full-time dancer and I performed with companies in San Francisco, and I'd always wanted to move back to New York. So we then together moved to New York, and I continued dancing in New York, and I started to feel very disconnected from my activist life. And I also wanted to travel and end my relationship. At that time, we were engaged to be married, and I felt too young to do that. And also it wasn't right for me. And so I traveled and studied with dance theater practitioners that I met in both San Francisco and New York, all over the world, but mostly in Asia. And that's when I got and I'd been photographing quite extensively. That's when I got the colors job. So that paid for my travel for almost a year. And during that time, I really pondered what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I always wanted to join the Peace Corps. So I'll apply to the Peace Corps. Maybe I'll apply to grad school in photojournalism so that could meet my artistic and political kind of interests and give them a place to live together. And so while I was doing this, I was performing with a company, a dance theater company, where everyone did everything because it was, very low budget. And I was doing a lot of the projections with my still photographs. And because that was right when projection design started to hit with theater and set and lighting design. So one day, one of the musicians came in and she had a 16 millimeter Bolex with one roll of film in it. And she handed it to me. And I started filming. I made a 2.5 minute, one roll, 16 millimeter in camera edited film and projected it on the stage in this performance. And I was absolutely hooked. I mean, being liberated from the single frame, adding time to the story, but also adding motion. And this is where it gets to me. It makes so much sense in terms of reverse engineering, but I was adding dance.
Yeah, it just makes all the sense in the world, doesn't it? Because you're in the business of motion, adding that to film.
Yeah.
A perfect marriage.
And then adding story to it, because stories take time and they move their own arc through time. And then you can add the social justice element because you can choose what story you're telling. So I was absolutely hooked, and I audited a class. I went to Eugene, Oregon to take care of my grandmother who was dying. And my sister was teaching at U of O. And I was applying for the Peace Corps and looking at grad programs in photojournalism. And I thought, well, I want to learn the mechanics of film, because I knew at that point the mechanics of still photography. And I had worked in a dark room and did all my own prints and all that. But I didn't know, I couldn't take a motion picture camera apart yet. So I took I audited, because my sister was a professor, I could audit classes. So I audited a film, the only film class that was being offered, and it turned out to be a documentary video class. So I made my first documentary. It's still my beloved aunt and uncle, who are like alternate parents to me. It's still their favorite thing I've ever made. It was called Joe's Garage, and it was about the oldest car repair shop in Eugene, Oregon. And of course, it's too long and too indulgent, and I use all sorts of music I'm not supposed to, all the things that you do when you don't know any of the rules. But yeah, and I was like, people have been telling me my whole life, like, just keep following your nose. You're not doing things the way other people do. You're not going to business school or law school or going straight into a full-time job for a reason. Trust your instincts. And at some point you'll find a place in which you can explore and play with the things you deeply care about. And that's what I call creative nonfiction,
And when did that moment come when you found your way?
When I made that Joe's Garage, I had a partner in my class who is still a dear friend of mine, but was like a partying undergrad and pretty much like didn't really show up, or showed up not quite capable of doing the work. So I kind of made it myself, and I filmed everything. And I was so happy in that car repair shop. I was like, they were like, okay, we're closing up. We have to go home. The time just flew. And then in the edit room, it was reel to reel. So I had those two little weird, I was at a console with those little white balls, have you ever edited on this? And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like choreography, but the dancers don't show up late with bad excuses. I just had complete control over the proscenium stage. And who came in, who entered when and where, and from, stage right and stage left. It's film. And at that moment, I was like, okay, this is the jam. And so I made another piece, and then moved with a dear friend partner to LA, because they were an aspiring filmmaker. And I worked behind the music, the VH1 show for a year. And I had these incredible mentors, these older women who are also still very good friends of mine. I was a researcher and an intern and a gopher and a PA. And we became dear friends, and they said to me, get the hell out of here. You need to be surrounded by people who inspire you and challenge you. And they convinced me to apply to grad school. And again, I was like funded and still actually supporting my parents. And I was like, I can't afford it. And they were like, it's grad school. People pay for you to go to grad school. And so I applied, and I got in, and I went, and I spent 2 blissful years out of the world of commerce, making my own work and developing my own voice, and also collaborating. I went to a program that's very much modeled on the art school method rather than on the industry. So instead of it being competitive and only a few people get to make their films, everybody makes their films, and everybody works on each other's films. And you make the hardest thing you can possibly imagine making, because this is the time and space to do it, and you have the support. So it was just heavenly. I loved it. And that was the big shift. That's when I moved back to New York, and I had some wonderful mentees, one of whom I saw the other night, and I got to remind her that she, as a female cinematographer, said to me when I was even in grad school, she said, you can do this. You can absolutely do this. And I came in, I applied for the Whitney Independent Studio Program. So my first year, I had a studio, and I was in class doing, mostly critical theory, which is what I had studied in Paris, and working freelancing. And then my main mentor is Wendell Harrington, who's a projection designer and kind of the OG. She was the first for Tommy's The Who on Broadway. She put 72 screens on the stage, I think. And she is still my dear friend, collaborator, and mentor. And so I wanted to be a projection designer, but so I worked with her a lot. But basically, being freelance, the thing that worked the best was being a cinematographer. Partly it worked personally because it really felt like play. But I also still do edit my own stuff or edit for other people because I do feel like it makes me, it keeps me learning in terms of cinematography, because when you're editing, you, at least I do, grumble at the cinematographer, and if the cinematographer is yourself, again, back to the reverse engineering, I learn a lot from editing. It keeps my cinematography skills shifting, because now I've done it, for so long that I have that kind of 10,000 hours in my bones, and it's part of my body. And yet I want to keep playing and growing with it. I don't want it to be absolutely, completely rote or part of my body. I want to still feel like sometimes I'm doing something totally new. I'm trying something totally new, So that's a very long-winded answer to your question. So please, I defer to you now.
This is an interesting transition, right? From, you decided this was really what was going to make you tick, that light bulb moment. And then, of course, you pursued it with a vengeance, as you said. And I'm wondering what those early jobs were like, and what would be the pivotal job, as you would consider it now in hindsight, to actually change your career.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, it's in that mindset sheet that I sent to you, but, I've been on a speaking tour during this sabbatical after this crazy job that we will talk about, but, I developed that mindset handout as a handout because, if you spend an hour or three with people in a dark auditorium giving a talk, whether it's part of a conference or a symposium or part of class, you never quite know where people are going to be at in their lives. Maybe they're just really tired, or maybe they're really hungry, or maybe they're worried about their ailing parent, or, so I created this handout as a shorthand to say, look, if none of this that we do in these couple of hours lands, I want to send you home with something so that maybe somewhere deep into the future, we can pick up this conversation. And one of the things that I say in it is, for me, it's really all about who. Back to the molecules bumping into each other, and that's how we learn and grow, or that's how I do.
Who did you bump into then in those early days of your career?
Yeah, I will go back to Wendell, I would say she's my primary mentor still. She's modeled for me so many of and talked through and played and advised, and then honored me with, some really deeply collaborative projects, one of which we're working on right now. And being a woman, anyone who's marginalized in this, white male patriarchal situation we're in, there's a secret sauce and a shorthand and a safety and a level of kindness that can be incredibly, not just healing, but also incredibly moving. It can kind of take us out of our own struggle in a way that just straight up learning, like didactic learning, may miss the mark sometimes. Sometimes it's that you just follow in someone's footsteps. And I think, I think of elderly people walking down the street that sometimes I'll try to just blow by, and then I think, wait a minute, what if I just walk behind them at the same pace or next to them at the same pace? And it's switching things up so that you're starting to see things and experience the incoming and the outflow slightly differently than you were 30 seconds ago. And Wendell really taught me encouraged me, taught me, guided me in that way. And, we worked a lot in some pretty chaotic situations together, and always just had each other's backs.
But in terms of the jobs themselves,
Okay.
that's where I want to go with this, Hope, is because there's a stepping stone, right? You didn't just end up in the West Wing one day. What was the career progression in terms of your actual career progression as a cinematographer?
Yeah.
Where did it start, and what were the key jobs that kept launching you on that path?
Well, they're two-part, and back to the kind of keeping things lively and diverse is that I found that, like switching editing and being a cinematographer, where when you edit, you're inside most of the day. Being a cinematographer, you're out in the world. I really liked alternating between those two, and then I found also that alternating between when I had a choice. The long form as a cinematographer, the long form labor of love, like indie feature doc, often very low pay, sometimes as long as 3 to 5 years. Alternating that with, one of the main things that I did and still do is music, where it kind of films itself. And a lot of that is day playing, rather than it being these long-term projects. And so, I started doing these one-take music videos, actually, because I had made a bunch of films about my mom and with my mom, personal films. And I was in touch with this filmmaker in Paris who said, would love to collaborate with you. I've seen your films. And they turned out to be the person behind, I don't know if you know the Blogatech series, the one-take music videos in Paris, the concerts à emporter, they're called, the like concerts to go. They're just really fun and interesting, and they're all filmed in one take. And when bands come through Paris, they collaborate with this filmmaker and they perform in an unlikely place, a non-performative space, not a stage, not a concert hall. So on the street or, in a freight elevator, and they're sort of filmed as happenings or set up or produced as a happening, like something might happen. And they're all filmed in one take. And so I started doing the New York versions of those with 2 other dear friends of mine. And it was such a blast. And that then led to, I started filming Unplugged and the spin-offs like Live at VH1. And that was so fun because it's an actual crew and a soundstage. Can you imagine? I mean, I was so used to just basically doing everything myself, sometimes sound, lights, in addition to being cinematographer, and sometimes even being director and producer. But suddenly I was working with this amazing crew, and everything's contained and on a set. And also just I learned a lot in terms of the craft and the skill. And, I was on a dolly and doing all the working with gear that I had never gotten to work with before. And I think that those 3 things combined, I would say, meant that I was starting to be able to have more autonomy and more choice in my freelance life, and starting to worry less about the hustle. And one of the jobs that I jumped at was with another female DP, Amy Rice, who I had actually met while marching for peace after 9/11. We both were impacted deeply by in New York, and we're part of 9/11 Families for Peace and the anti-war movement. And she had a Bolex, I had a Bolex. We're both filming the march that we're marching in, and we looked over, and it was like, oh, I've heard about the other female DP in New York. And so she ended up hiring me to help her on a documentary about then Senator Obama, because the idea, this was in 2006, was that it would be a 6-year documentary in case he ran in 2012. Can you imagine? Everything changed.
I would imagine that really was a life-changing moment for you.
Absolutely.
And it must have given you confidence that you might be able to pursue something which would combine all of your interests in, social activism.
Exactly. Because I had never done like straight up political work before, It had always been like a parallel course in my life. And then he became the candidate, which no one ever thought was going to happen. And it was obviously a year and a half since the from 2006 when the film started. And he became the candidate so late in the game. It was, end of June. If you think about, that leaves basically 5 months, not even 4.5 months for him to be the candidate and run a successful, hopefully, campaign. And so they really staffed up. The staff was wonderful, but it was small. And so they tripled their staff and asked me to leave the doc because at that point I'd become a known entity as a cinematographer, but also because I was organizing a lot in New York. And I did. Although I will tell you, the first thing I said was, no. And they were like, what do you mean, no? Why? And I said, because I'm trained in nuance and complexity. I've never made propaganda and I don't know how to do it. And I'm not comfortable doing it. And they said, that's why we want you. Also, your name's Hope, so we have to hire you.
There's that too.
There's that.
And so at what point did you believe in yourself then and stop carrying that imposter syndrome that is so common among women in the business?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I did. I mean, I definitely started believing in myself as I got more comfortable back to the 10,000 hours, that thing at that point I'd been a, cinematographer for a while and had navigated a lot of stressful jobs. And like I said, I'm a mechanical and systems person. So even in grad school, one of my goals was I want to be able to take a camera apart and be able to put it back together because I was at that point even really sick of the dudes and the bros standing around, like throwing around all their lingo. I wanted to be able to not only throw around the lingo, but be better than them at the technical aspects. And it just takes a long time and it takes mistakes and scars. So there were a lot of mistakes and scars in my past that I felt, honor bound to learn from. And the cool thing about, such an intense, at the time, the campaign job was 14, 15, 16 hours a day, 4 hours of sleep. I was also taking photos, still photos. I was posting them on a blog every night. I was live streaming. So I was also carrying all the live stream equipment. I was doing all the sound. I mean, it was nutty. But it is the ultimate crash course because you cannot be questioning your aperture, your shutter speed, your white balance, your focus when, potentially, a history busting candidate is making the speech of their lifetime and you're live streaming for, millions of people. Right?
I'm wondering, to your point, though, because it was a man's world, did you feel that you were changing the narrative now and being empowered through these positions?
Yes, I did. And I love that part as the counterculture, rabble rousing feminist activist that I am. I loved that part of it. I also still really resent it, as you can hear in my voice. One of the things Gretchen was talking about that in the interview or the discussion you two had, it's like the shell and the pea. It's like it keeps moving around, mm-hmm. And the people who have more power than you, rather than like honor the dictum that the abuse of power comes as no surprise. Like our job is to be surprised at that abuse of power, but it's heady emotional stuff to wield power over other people and to be in power and to be hierarchically see yourself as higher than someone else. And I I see it as my job, actually, to continue to be surprised at that abuse, to bristle at it, and to fight with everything I have as gently and in the most pacifist way possible. But Senator Elizabeth Warren taught me, like, fight hard, choose the righteous fights. And this one, I'm sorry, the world is out of balance. I mean, when you think about balance, I was born as a Libra, so balance is and when you think about justice, like we're 50-50, male, female, and everything in between. There is no reason this should be a man's world. There's no reason.
I'm sure that in all your experiences, though, with that political journey you took right to the West Wing, and there must have been so many stories, Hope, and so many I'm sure you can't repeat, but were there any moments when you pricked yourself and it would be an emotional moment thinking, I am here in this moment recording history?
Chris, I will tell you, with the caveat that I understand if this sounds cliche, made up, untrue, I will tell you every single day, every day. And I'm a crier. I'm a grinner. I'm a dancer. I'm a celebrant of life. I'm a laugher. I can't help if it was just like unbelievable every day. That doesn't mean that for most of the day I wasn't just another grumbling, disgruntled, mumbling, hungry, tired, exhausted, frustrated, bureaucratically challenged employee, because that is 100% true. Of working in the kind of institution and the halls of power and the risk-averse culture, which was also incredibly new to me. All of that is also true, but I mean, if I wasn't having those moments at least once a day, then it's not worth it, because you give up everything. You give up, back to the freedom, there was none. I really honored my personal life and my friendships. And even then, my caveat was always, yes, 1-800, hell yeah, I'll see you there. Also, I might not, because I might be on a plane to go to Saudi Arabia with 4 hours notice.
How did you handle the pressure, though? Do you relish it, or did you find it daunting at first?
Yeah, and I almost quit. I will tell you, within 6 months, I was done. I was out of there. And part of it, I've started to talk about this more, and I don't know if you got a chance to hear the Depth of Field podcast that I just did with Penny De Los Santos, but we talked about this a lot because she was very interested in talking about adversity in the workplace, and how you kind of come back from that and find inspiration even if in a difficult situation. And I worked alongside someone with whom I actually within 6 months thought, this is an impossible situation. I need to leave. And they were a misogynist bully with more power than I had, and made my life my work life in particular, really at times heartbreaking. And I didn't know what to do and how to get out of this hole that I was in. And then it came to me, not without a lot of help and support from my circle of amazing family of friends and supporters and advisors. I just turned this guy into my guru. And I said, I am going to learn about the dark parts of my inner life. You are going to show me how angry I can get and what I do in the face of seemingly unsurmountable aggression. Because this is, at the time, it was the best job ever. And I was like, no one gets to take that from me. Not even you. Especially not you. You know? But this goes back to that mindset handout. One of the things in there is our lives and our work are only as good as we feel. And I had been part of a number of various therapeutic practices since I was a kid. And I had at times really reliable and strong inner life. It wavers, of course, because I'm human and I'm a sentient being, and it's not constant. But I have tools and I have practices, and I just thought it felt like an injustice.
And how did you feel that you had positioned yourself when you exited that world of higher office?
I was pretty confused at that point. Part of it is exhaustion, because most people don't spend more than a year and a half in that world, for a lot of different reasons. But that's the average, to spend time in that kind of environment and on that kind of short leash. And also, I was really devastated by the 2016 election, and the combination of the two, plus, a lot of very wise and thoughtful people in my life saying, you got to take this moment and you got to milk it for all that it's worth. It kind of goes back to that teenage rebellion thing I was talking about. I really wanted and saw myself more comfortable, happy, and inspired by doing the opposite.
The rebel in you.
The rebel. But I also I know myself well enough. Again, I've, at times sort of moved through the world almost as an athlete, and I just knew my body and myself well enough to know that I really needed to rest. So it was like I really wanted a sabbatical, but that wasn't part of the sort of structure that I was in. So I created one for myself, which is that part of my freelance life before the White House stuff, I had always really prioritized teaching. And being a freelance cinematographer, you can't really take on, a once or twice a week, couple hours a day or night teaching gig, because that doesn't mesh with the schedule. But whenever I could, I would guest teach or do seminars or symposiums or intensives. And so at that point, I was, really, first of all, missing it. And it was always hard when I got incoming saying, can you come, talk at our university or our school or whatever conference? I would have to say, I can, but the caveat is 5 minutes before I might have to, drop out because of world events, but count me in for after January of 2017. And that's how I created a sabbatical and a 1-year speaking tour. And it was wonderful. I traveled all over the world and mostly worked with younger people and students, but also with other digital teams and governments and theater and dance and, cultural institutions. And I love traveling, and I'd really missed being able to sort of travel on my own, in my own stead, not on someone else's time. And I, at the same time, was writing a chapter for a book called The West Wingers. And each of us in the book wrote a chapter sort of with the through line being, here's the story of how I really never saw myself working at the White House. And then I did. So it was like people who, for whom working in the West Wing was out of reach. And then we became part of the Obama administration. So And then I went on a speaking tour with that book. So that's kind of how I gave myself a break and a rest. And by the time I was done, similar to your LA time, so I thought I was going to move back to Brooklyn after DC, but a lot of my friends had moved to LA during the big kind of New York to LA exodus over those 8 years. And so I moved to Venice Beach to be near dear friends of mine. And by the time this speaking tour and book tour was done, I was freelance again. And then I got the best job ever, working on Senator Warren's presidential campaign. And the campaign headquarters was basically here, in Boston. And I was ready. I had missed New York so much and my life here. And I'm a big gardener and activist and community organizer. And I just missed my roots here so much. And so I moved back to New York and worked on her campaign for the whole time. And it was heaven. It was the best team I've ever worked with by far. We're still really, really close. And she not only has become a very dear friend and advisor, but she really taught me when to stand up. She's a fighter.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm wondering if there was one single lesson you could say that President Obama taught you.
One of the things on that mindset sheet that he and I used to bond about a lot, because people used to introduce me as, oh, this is Hope. She's the nicest person in politics, which sounds, I'm not that. I'm honored. That's a very, very kind thing to say. It also means I'm still not of this place. You know what I mean? It's like saying, oh, she's from Sweden, like being a foreign exchange student. Nothing wrong with that. But it means like I'm not like these people and I don't belong here. And one of the things that he and I bonded about early on was that he would often, sort of as people were leaving a room, especially when it was people like, scientists, thinkers, artists, after a meeting about something, he'd turn to me and he'd tap his temple or next to his eye and he'd say, I saw you twinkling. And I was like, I saw you twinkling. And he said, Hope, these are our people. Everyone can be kind and everyone can be useful. And then I'd say, and everyone can be playful and everyone can be fierce. And that was our thing, But this kind of like, what's my title? Where do I fit? Who do I have power over? Who can I throw under the bus to make myself look better? That's just, that's theater. That's antics, and I get it, and I know that I participate in that in my own, my gigantic fragile ego, of course, plays those games, but I see it as performance, whereas what's inside, what are sincere, genuine hopes are. It's really, back to it's all about who. When you meet someone's eyes on that and you see the twinkle in their eyes because they're inspired or they're motivating you or challenging you on something, that's the jam. That's what I go towards.
What would you like to hear people say about you then and your legacy at this point in your career?
That I was kind and useful and playful and fierce.
And you survived that political journey, that world.
I did.
Because
I think like any attraction repulsion, it's like the thing that you're kind of bad at, you're also really good at. It's like my outside, going back to, I don't make propaganda. I don't know how I work in complexity and nuance. Well, that's why we want you. It's like that's the and back to the balance, the male, female, yin, yang, and everything in between. That and the molecules crashing into each other and being interdependent and messing with each other. Like that's how we grow. So I would like for people, to say, I so enjoyed my learning and growing alongside my friend Hope. I think that's my particular visual art, where I feel like the passage of time melts, is cinematography. And I love doing it. And I hope to continue to be kind of more playful and learn and grow in the art and craft of it. And it's also about being sentient being that is alongside others, making things a little different, a little weirder, a little kinder, a little fiercer, definitely more playful.
I'm wondering what your family say about you now, having watched all of your journey. Is your father surprised? Your mother? What's their reaction to your career?
Yeah, they're pretty surprised, I think, because I had for so long been more of the pillar and the supporter. I think we're still navigating some of the, what it means that I also have my own independent and at times quite separate life. And that, there's some grief that goes with that. And I feel it and I get it. And I try to be as gentle with that, with myself and with my family as possible. I think, for a very long time, there wasn't really a kind of cocktail party elevator in passing language that my family knew how to use in terms of how's Hope and what's Hope doing. There was a lot of kind of, well, I think she's in Romania editing. It was like very vague and kind of usually not actually up to date or accurate. And probably, I take half of the responsibility for that. Like any relationship, it's half and half. So probably that gave me some freedom. I will say that the elevator conversation cocktail party version, that in passing, Hope's Obama's principal videographer, that did kind of change things for my family. And all of a sudden, it's like I'm getting, a screen grab from my uncle who kind of lives online and is like, you just landed in, wherever, I got this, I saw you or whatever, or like, clippings coming in the mail of a newspaper article in which, they read about me, or their favorite video that I made that week, or, I just became, I think my work, my life's work, my craft, my interest became more accessible to them. And, you're always in relationship to your family. That never stops. And, I may have parented and continue to parent my parents. I may have lots of different roles in my family, but I will always be my parents' kid, and I'll always be my siblings' older or younger sibling. And those dynamics and, the way that they land in our hearts and souls and minds, that's a life's work to explore. It also just kind of goes to the bone marrow. And it did change the way I feel kind of advocating for my own self and navigating the world, the emotional world of my family, once I felt like my family understood, at least, in a way that they could talk about with their friends and family. It changed things. It did. And part of that is societal pressure, and that's what we all navigate in different ways. But a family is a very tiny society, and it's been really, really lovely to have these, even small moments of people in my family expressing, taking the energy, time, and effort to express that they really appreciate, what I'm trying to do and follow it and ask about it. Because I am kind of used to deferring to others and that kind of codependent mode of taking care of other people. So it's really nice to feel more present and like taking up closer to half of the relationship with my family. And, it may have taken a massive world leader and my proximity to them to do that, which is funny, but life is weird. So.
Well, it would seem that you took that responsibility, that earned privilege in a way of the position that you held through the many years that you served in the White House. I'm wondering, though, how you wear that mantle of responsibility, given your 50-50 role now, and taking that into the classroom or wherever it is that you're speaking. But what does Hope Elizabeth Hall feel like she is doing now in the world and feel responsible for doing now moving forward with the rest of your career?
Well, one of the organizing principles of working in, let's say, the Obama political environment and the Senator Warren political environment, with that access and privilege comes tremendous responsibility, with which and alongside which and from which I hope that I have learned a lot. One of the other things that it comes with is a kind of subsuming of subtler access to not only my own inner landscape, but the landscape of my friends and family and community. And I think now, I think a lot about and really enjoy spending time thinking about, pondering, observing, questioning, asking about the subtleties of, my community and my world that I've created around me, rather than it being kind of presented to me as my temporary world and someone else's world, if you know what I mean. I feel that there's more volition, and I'm really enjoying that, choosing again who and how, when and where I spend my time and my energy. That feels central right now, and with it comes, there's not a day that I don't miss certain aspects of these best jobs ever. And my dream life and my emotional life are certainly still absolutely filled with a lot of that swirling emotion and the details of that. In fact, I just went to Chicago and along with thousands of other alums, celebrated the 15-year anniversary of election night in Grant Park. And it was incredibly moving for so many reasons, but in particular, like any trauma. I mean, this was in so many ways a positive trauma. It's still a trauma. It's like it has such searing effects on our systems to be living in that kind of intense way, that it was so it's really beautiful to be relaxed enough to be able and see my friends, colleagues, some of whom I hadn't seen in 15 years, some of whom I still see all the time and I'm in constant relationship with, but to see them in a more relaxed mode, and for us to be able to, you know, playfully and kindly and with the beauty of distance, to be able to say, you know, that was rough or that was amazing, and both are true. So I guess that's a very roundabout way of saying that I'm really practicing focusing on and doing my best to honor the volition that I have now, and the autonomy that I have over how things go in my precious time here. Because oh heavens, if we are experiencing things as they are right now, if we're living externally in any way, this is just bonkers time. And I really try to practice gentleness with that feeling and with those whom I can interact with.
Is there a memoir?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I think the chapter that I wrote, first of all, taught me a lot. I've been writing my whole life, and it's I mean, we all, most of us have, but I mean, I've been writing, you know, creatively, not just for like assignments and life. And that chapter was hard, and it was harder than I thought it was going to be. I luckily had some wonderful, wonderful support and help. Some of my closest friends in life are writers, and I had incredible support from the edit team. And but when I finished, I kind of thought I was done. And you know, like anything, it can that goes deeply. You can kind of wrap it up and put it in a box and file it away. But sometimes even then it comes back to tap you on the shoulder. And I have been feeling that tap recently. And I have people in my life who kind of keep stepping up into my life and up and saying, I will help you. Like, I will help you do this. So of course that makes it so much more appealing, and I would love that. I feel a little antsy right now. I'm a wanderer and a mover and a traveler, and pandemic has been like life-changing in every way. One of the ways is that it's really, I am not a sit at a desk person. I'm not a stay-at-home person. And I've learned how to be that when I need to be. But there's something in me that feels very antsy right now. And that's my repulsion to writing a memoir. If I could do it while walking or wandering, maybe I shouldn't roll that out. Maybe that's the way I do it. But I think that's one way of resisting it right now, is that it feels very sedentary, and I don't feel sedentary right now.
Not the time or the place, but maybe in the future, and we will look out for it, hope. And so the land of hope and free and being free. So enjoy all of that, and enjoy good health as well.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story with us.
Oh, you're welcome. And I have so many questions for you. I'm not used to doing all the talking, so I just would love to keep talking, and I'd love to hear so much more about you. So I hope we can do that ideally in person, since, life has changed and we can see each other in person now, or whatever works for you.
I would enjoy that, Hope.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Would love to. Well, thank you again so much for your time.
You're welcome. You take good care, okay?
And that's a wrap for season 1 of the Art Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed these conversations as much as I've enjoyed hosting them. And so much so that I will be back in the new year with season 2 and another fabulous lineup of women from around the world of visual arts. So I hope you'll join me then. In the meanwhile, if you have any suggestions for guests for season 2, please do drop me a line to hollowellstudios@gmail.com, or you can follow us on social media. On Instagram, you can also leave us any comments, questions, suggestions for guests there as well. And as always, please do give us a follow and share the show with anyone you think might enjoy these conversations too. And also, if you've been listening to this show regularly, you'll be used to the episodes dropping weekly on a Saturday. Well, that will change in the new year. We will be dropping new episodes of season 2 on a Tuesday at 5:30 a.m. Eastern. That will be the new regular publication date for this podcast. So be sure to follow and subscribe on your podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And with that, I will sign off and wish you all a very happy new year.